Winston Churchill put the choice before the Western world in 1920. Churchill claimed that instead of pursuing their own best interests, Westerners should join with Zionist Jews so that communist anti-Zionist Jews did not oppress, terrorize, and exterminate Western Gentiles. At the same time, Vladimir Lenin urged Russian Gentiles to join with communist Jews to destroy the West so that Zionist and capitalist Jews did not oppress and exterminate Eastern Gentiles. Both sides of this artificial and staged conflict favor communist and Zionist Jews under their common leadership in cause of creating a global empire ruled by their messianic king from Jerusalem and deliberately led to perpetual conflict between East and West that has intentionally consumed the lives of over 300 million Gentiles, caused 2 world wars, and is leading us into a third apocalyptic world war that threatens to extinguish billions of innocent lives. Churchill, together with Rothschild, Balfour, and Lloyd George, duped the Atlanticist Leviathan of Great Britain into sponsoring the Zionist cause, as if doing so would save them from the behemoth of the Eurasianist Marxist Jews. Churchill's initial appeal appeared in the Illustrated Sunday Herald of February 8, 1920, on page 5, under the banner headline, Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. He wrote, "Some people like Jews, and some do not. But no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that they are, beyond all question, the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. Disraeli, the Jew Prime Minister of England and leader of the Conservative Party, who was always true to his race and proud of his origin, said on a well-known occasion, 'The Lord deals with the nations as the nations deal with the Jews.' Certainly when we look at the miserable state of Russia, where of all countries in the world the Jews were the most cruelly treated, and contrast it with the fortunes of our own country, which seems to have been so providentially preserved amid the awful perils of these times, we must admit that nothing that has since happened in the history of the world has falsified the truth of Disraeli's confident assertion. Good and bad Jews. The conflict between good and evil, which proceeds unceasingly in the breast of man, nowhere reaches such an intensity as in the Jewish race. The dual nature of mankind is nowhere more strongly or more terribly exemplified. We owe to the Jews in the Christian revelation a system of ethics which, even if it were entirely separated from the supernatural, would be incomparably the most precious possession of mankind, worth in fact the fruits of all other wisdom and learning put together. On that system and by that faith there has been built out of the wreck of the Roman Empire the whole of our existing civilization. And it may well be that this same astounding race may at the present time be in the actual process of producing another system of morals and philosophy as malevolent as Christianity was benevolent, which, if not arrested, would shatter irretrievably all that Christianity has rendered possible. It would almost seem as if the gospel of Christ and the gospel of Antichrist were destined to originate among the same people, and that this mystic and mysterious race had been chosen for the supreme manifestations, both of the divine and the diabolical. National Jews. There can be no greater mistake than to attribute to each individual a recognizable share in the qualities which make up the national character. There are all sorts of men, good, bad, and, for the most part, indifferent, in every country and in every race. Nothing is more wrong than to deny to an individual, on account of race or origin, his right to be judged on his personal merits and conduct. In a people of peculiar genius like the Jews, contrasts are more vivid, the extremes are more widely separated, the resulting consequences are more decisive. At the present fateful period, there are 3 main lines of political conception among the Jews, 2 of which are helpful and hopeful in a very high degree to humanity, and the third absolutely destructive. First, there are the Jews who, dwelling in every country throughout the world, identify themselves with that country, enter into its national life, and, while adhering faithfully to their own religion, regard themselves as citizens in the fullest sense of the state which has received them. Such a Jew living in England would say, "I am an Englishman practicing the Jewish faith." This is a worthy conception and useful in the highest degree. We in Great Britain well know that during the Great Struggle, the influence of what may be called the national Jews in many lands was cast preponderatingly on the side of the Allies. And in our own army, Jewish soldiers have played a most distinguished part. some rising to the command of armies, others winning the Victoria Cross for valor. The national Russian Jews, in spite of the disabilities under which they have suffered, have managed to play an honorable and useful part in the national life even of Russia. As bankers and industrialists, they have strenuously promoted the development of Russia's economic resources, and they were foremost in the creation of those remarkable organizations, the Russian cooperative societies. In politics, their support has been given, for the most part, to liberal and progressive movements, and they have been among the staunchest upholders of friendship with France and Great Britain. International Jews. In violent opposition to all this sphere of Jewish effort rise the schemes of the international Jews. The adherents of this sinister confederacy are mostly men reared up among the unhappy populations of countries where Jews are persecuted on account of their race. Most, if not all of them, have forsaken the faith of their forefathers and divorced from their minds all spiritual hopes of the next world. This movement among the Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, and down to Trotsky, Russia, Bela Kun, Hungary, Rosa Luxemburg, Germany, and Emma Goldman, United States, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played, as a modern writer, Mrs. Webster, has so ably shown, a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. Terrorist Jews. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders. Thus, Chicherin, a pure Russian, is eclipsed by his nominal subordinate Litvinov, and the influence of Russians like Bukharin or Lunacharsky cannot be compared with the power of Trotsky or of Zinoviev, the dictator of the Red Citadel, Petrograd, or of Krasin or Radek, all Jews. In the Soviet institutions, the predominance of Jews is even more astonishing, and the prominent, if not indeed the principal, part in the system of terrorism applied by the extraordinary commissions for combating counter-revolution has been taken by Jews, and in some notable cases by Jewesses. The same evil prominence was obtained by Jews in the brief period of terror during which Bela Kun ruled in Hungary. The same phenomenon has been presented in Germany, especially in Bavaria, so far as this madness has been allowed to prey upon the temporary prostration of the German people. Although in all these countries there are many non-Jews every whit as bad as the worst of the Jewish revolutionaries, the part played by the latter in proportion to their numbers in the population is astonishing. Protector of the Jews. Needless to say, the most intense passions of revenge have been excited in the breasts of the Russian people. Wherever General Denikin's authority could reach, protection was always accorded to the Jewish population, and strenuous efforts were made by his officers to prevent reprisals and to punish those guilty of them. So much was this the case that the Petlurist propaganda against General Denikin denounced him as the protector of the Jews. The Mrs. Healy, nieces of Mr. Tim Healy, in relating their personal experiences in Kiev, have declared that to their knowledge on more than one occasion, officers who committed offenses against Jews were reduced to the ranks and sent out of the city to the front. But the hordes of brigands by whom the whole vast expanse of the Russian Empire is becoming infested do not hesitate to gratify their lust for blood and for revenge at the expense of the innocent Jewish population whenever an opportunity occurs. The brigand Makhno, the hordes of Petlura and of Grigoriev, who signalized their every success by the most brutal massacres, everywhere found among the half-stupefied, half-infuriated population an eager response to anti-Semitism in its worst and foulest forms. The fact that in many cases Jewish interests in Jewish places of worship are accepted by the Bolsheviks from their universal hostility has tended more and more to associate the Jewish race in Russia with the villainies which are now being perpetrated. This is an injustice on millions of helpless people, most of whom are themselves sufferers from the revolutionary regime. It becomes, therefore, specially important to foster and develop any strongly marked Jewish movement which leads directly away from these fatal associations. And it is here that Zionism has such a deep significance for the whole world at the present time, a home for the Jews. Zionism offers the third sphere to the political conceptions of the Jewish race. In violent contrast to international communism, it presents to the Jew a national idea of a commanding character. It has fallen to the British government as the result of the conquest of Palestine to have the opportunity and the responsibility of securing for the Jewish race all over the world a home and a center of national life. The statesmanship and historic sense of Mr. Balfour were prompt to seize this opportunity. Declarations have been made which have irrevocably decided the policy of Great Britain. The fiery energies of Dr. Weizmann, the leader for practical purposes of the Zionist project, backed by many of the most prominent British Jews and supported by the full authority of Lord Allenby, are all directed to achieving the success of this inspiring movement. Of course, Palestine is far too small to accommodate more than a fraction of the Jewish race, nor do the majority of national Jews wish to go there. But if, as may well happen, there should be created in our own lifetime by the banks of the Jordan a Jewish state under the protection of the British Crown, which might comprise 3 or 4 millions of Jews, an event would have occurred in the history of the world which would, from every point of view, be beneficial, and would be especially in harmony with the truest interests of the British Empire. Zionism has already become a factor in the political convulsions of Russia, as a powerful competing influence in Bolshevik circles with the international communistic system. Nothing could be more significant than the fury with which Trotsky has attacked the Zionists generally, and Dr. Weizmann in particular. The cruel penetration of his mind leaves him in no doubt that his schemes of a worldwide communistic state under Jewish domination are directly thwarted and hindered by this new ideal, which directs the energies and the hopes of Jews in every land towards a simpler, a truer, and a far more attainable goal. The struggle which is now beginning between the Zionist and Bolshevik Jews is little less than a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. Duty of loyal Jews. It is particularly important in these circumstances that the national Jews in every country who are loyal to the land of their adoption should come forward on every occasion, as many of them in England have already done, and take a prominent part in every measure for combating the Bolshevik conspiracy. In this way, they will be able to vindicate the honor of the Jewish name and make it clear to all the world that the Bolshevik movement is not a Jewish movement, but is repudiated vehemently by the great mass of the Jewish race. But a negative resistance to Bolshevism in any field is not enough. Positive alternatives are needed in the moral as well as in the social sphere. And in building up with the utmost possible rapidity a Jewish national center in Palestine, which may become not only a refuge to the oppressed from the unhappy lands of Central Europe, but which will also be a symbol of Jewish unity and the temple of Jewish glory, a task is presented on which many blessings rest. At the same time that Churchill was duping the British into abandoning their own cause in favor of Jewish interests, Lenin and Trotsky waged the Red Terror across Eastern Europe and forced Russian Gentiles to commit genocide against their own people in the name of winning Jews over to the communist cause, which was supposedly anti-Zionist and anti-capitalist. The great Soviet encyclopedia likewise claimed that the Marxist-Leninist cause was a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people between Bolshevism and Zionism, upon which the fate of mankind rested. Just like the British, the Russians were duped into abandoning their own self-interests and their lives to fight and die for the Jewish cause, in this fake dialectic, both sides of which produced the same end result: a global Jewish empire centered in Jerusalem and ruled by the Jewish Messianic king. In its article Zionism, the great Soviet encyclopedia proclaimed, Zionism, the most reactionary variety of Jewish bourgeois nationalism. Zionism became widespread during the 20th century among the Jews in the capitalist countries. Today, it is a nationalistic ideology represented by a ramified system of organizations and a policy expressing the interests of the Jewish big bourgeoisie, which is closely linked with the monopolistic bourgeoisie of the imperialist states. Modern Zionism is militantly chauvinist, racist, anti-communist, and anti-Soviet. Zionism emerged as a political trend in the late 19th century. Its function was to distract the Jewish toiling masses from the revolutionary struggle and to maintain bourgeois dominance over them. Zionist ideology maintains that the Jews in various countries constitute an extraterritorial, single worldwide Jewish nation. The Jews are a distinctive, unique people, a people chosen by God. All peoples among whom the Jews live are in one way or another anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism is a permanent phenomenon, and assimilation or the merging of Jews with the surrounding population is unnatural and sinful. The Jews have historical rights to the lands of their biblical ancestors, Palestine and its adjoining regions, where they must gather and build a purely Jewish and egalitarian state. Zionist ideologists seek to prove the unbreakable bond of Jews throughout the world, with Zionism to which they must subordinate their own interests wherever they may be. The politicized dogmas of Judaism state that the Jews are chosen by God and have a messianic task to fulfill. These dogmas, in Judaism's mythical thesis of the Jews' uniqueness, are constituents of the extreme nationalism, chauvinism, and racism inherent in Zionist ideology and practice. The ideologists of Zionism maintain that the Jewish question is eternal, unique, and beyond class considerations. Zionists utilize every means to propagandize the false idea of class peace between toiling Jews and the Jewish bourgeoisie. All Jews are brothers. All forms of class struggle among Jews are proclaimed to be national treason. The Zionists have always made use of demagogy and tactical maneuvers in their efforts to conceal the anti-popular reactionary essence of Zionism, alleging that Zionism is the national liberation movement of Jews throughout the world. After the State of Israel was formed in 1948 on part of Palestine's territory by a resolution of the United Nations, Zionism became Israel's official ideology. Its main goals are to secure the unconditional support of Israel by the world's Jews, to gather the world's Jews in Israel, and to inculcate a Zionist spirit among Jews in various countries. Zionism seeks to expand Israel to the boundaries of the greater land of Israel. To this end, Zionists evoke the thesis of eternal anti-Semitism, a situation which they often deliberately instigate. Zionism's main policy has always been one of struggle, both open and covert, against socialism, the international communist and national liberation movements, and the Soviet Union and other socialist countries. Immediately after the victory of the October Revolution of 1917 in Russia, Zionism unleashed an active struggle against the new Soviet state. After World War II, amid a further intensification of the overall crisis of capitalism, the anti-communism and anti-Sovietism of international Zionism assumed still broader dimensions. The shift in the alignment of forces in the world in favor of socialism, the successful resolution of the national question, including the Jewish question in the USSR, and the Soviet Union's consistent support of the national liberation struggle of the Arab peoples have given rise to intensified anti-Soviet and anti-communist Zionist propaganda and activity. International Zionism strives to undermine the moral and political unity of the peoples of the socialist countries and to prevent citizens of Jewish nationality from participation in building socialism and communism. Zionism seeks to subvert the relaxation of international tension and, in particular, the incipient normalization of Soviet-American relations. As a shock detachment of imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism, international Zionism opposes the national liberation movement of the peoples of Asia and Latin America. In the Near East, the Zionist ruling circles of Israel conduct a policy of aggression and of continuous territorial expansion at the expense of the Arab peoples, particularly the Arab people of Palestine. Zionism became one of imperialism's chief allies in its global struggle against the world liberation movement. Marxists have always repudiated the theory and practice of Zionism. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin revealed the reactionary essence of Zionism, emphasizing that its dogmas are reactionary, false, and contrary to the interests of the Jewish proletariat. He criticized the Zionist theses concerning the unique nature of the Jewish people, the alleged absence of class differences among the Jews, and the imaginary communality of their interests, explaining that such assertions aim to distract the Jewish toiling masses from the proletariat's common class struggle. The international communist movement denounces the anti-popular, reactionary character of Zionism and Zionist activity in all countries. In the Jewish communities of the countries of the West and among the population of Israel, there is an increasing comprehension that the Zionist policies of Israel's ruling circles may lead the population of Israel to a real national catastrophe. Churchill exposed some of the horrors of Bolshevism and the lower echelons of who instigated and controlled it. The great Soviet encyclopedia revealed the dark side of Zionism and who was behind it. Neither condemned both Zionism and Bolshevism as the existential threat they posed to humanity, or the fact that they were two sides of the same messianic coin, working together to annihilate the Gentiles and fulfill Jewish prophecy by artificial and deceptive means. Instead, they each played their role in pitting the Gentiles against each other so that they mutually destroy one another and fulfill the messianic plans of the ancient Jews for a global empire ruled by the Jewish King Messiah in Jerusalem. The Bolsheviks used Zionism as a pretext to lure Gentiles into submitting to Marxism. The Zionists employed the Red Terror as a means to dupe Gentiles into embracing Zionism. Gentiles failed to serve their own best interests by rejecting both Zionism and Bolshevism, and instead assisted in the genocidal mass murder, which are the common purpose of Zionism and communism. Today, Bolshevik Zionists, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Vladimir Putin, and Keir Starmer openly support the Zionist Marxist cause to rule the world from Jerusalem.